Welcome to another edition of Need for Courage. I'm your host, John Byrne, and with me today is Hari Prasad. Hari is an MU grad, which we're going to talk about it. He's a program associate and researcher for the data and analysis team at the Carter Center and a bunch of other projects that he works on, and we're going to talk about that. We are really happy to have you today, Hari. Well, I want to start off with sort of a basic question. I think many of us are well aware of the great work that the Carter Center has done for decades, but maybe sort of remind us of the mission of the Carter Center and some of the work that you're doing there, and then we'll obviously morph into some of the other topics relevant to peace studies and the work that you've been doing in your career.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Great to talk to my former alma mater. For the Carter Center, I will put the disclaimer that all my opinions are my own, so that I can say extra crazy things and I won't get in trouble. But we kind of, if you look at our slogan, the slogan is waging peace, fighting disease, and building hope. So I would say if you're looking at this at the very, very top level, the Carter Center is divided into two. There's the health programs, which one of the biggest programs we've done is fighting the guinea worm disease, which I didn't even know much about the disease before I joined, but it was interesting that they mentioned this used to have millions and millions of cases, and it was a very painful disease where to get the worm out, you had to take several days to get the worm out, but now we're down to, I think, less than a dozen. But then you also have the peace side, which is the side I work on, where you kind of have one of the biggest, most visible programs we do is election observation, but we also work on strengthening human rights. And my specific program is conflict resolution. So we have certain contexts that we work on, which include Mali and the Sahel, Sudan, Israel, Palestine, the US, and Syria, of us thinking about what ways that we can improve conflict resolution, as the name could suggest. What's the avenues that we can hit, where different approaches we can take. So that's the very top level down, trying to give you the sky. I'm forgetting the word now, but the bird's eye view of the center very, very broadly.
Appreciate that. And obviously President Carter was well known for his advocacy for peace during his time in office, which I was around for, and certainly afterwards. And we know that he worked with many to deal with election issues to make sure there were safe elections. He's done that in his career, and obviously the creation of the center. I want to go back to the beginning of your career. You also have a master's degree from GW, but you got your undergraduate degree at Marquette University and the Center for Peacemaking, which I only became aware of because my daughter, Jennifer, worked there when she was in graduate school, because when I was at Marquette way back when, there were no centers, but there certainly wasn't a direction to do peace studies and conflict avoidance and dealing with issues like political violence. So I'm very interested in why you gravitated to that, and talk a bit about what the center meant to you and what it can mean, hopefully, to the next several generations of students that we hope choose peace studies as at least a partial area of focus for them, if not a total immersion, obviously depending on their direction in life, that sort of thing. So talk a bit about that, because you're one of the few we are interviewing so far that took what they've learned and actually are building a career based at least in large part on that. So talk a bit about that.
Yeah, no, happy to. Now, maybe I'm being old here, but even the students nowadays at the Center for Peacemaking have it a lot easier, because back when I was a student, the peace studies minor was still being formulated. Now you guys have a major. My interaction, because I was of course international affairs and economics double major, and the Center for Peacemaking was holding a conference for people were submitting proposals and stuff like that for papers. And me and a couple of friends decided to write a thing about the impact of sanctions on humanitarian issues. And when we did that, since we were among the few Marquette students who were putting a paper in, well, now he's a director. Patrick actually met with us and talked us through it. And I think that was my very first instance of really interacting with the Center for Peacemaking. And of course, because of that, always remember Patrick aware of that. And a few years, sorry, something's in my throat.
It's okay.
I think a year or so later, I was looking for a part-time job, and that's seems like a lot of stuff with the Center for Peacemaking. I like their mission. Even when we had that short discussion with Patrick before, there's a lot about the Center for Peacemaking I didn't know about, because at the time I think Patrick had gone to Afghanistan, had gone to had all these things. I'm this is cool. Especially at the time, I don't think it was very well advertised within Marquette. So, but yeah, like this was he kind of had like I applied for an administrative assistant job, but Patrick was like, "Hey, I remember you from writing this paper. Do you actually, we have this other position. It's not going to be as many hours, but it's part of this like kind of experiment that we're doing in Milwaukee." And that was actually a very interesting experience I reflect on a lot because it was part of this greater Milwaukee study of like how to bring down violence in the city. And our job was, we were going to the different boys and girls clubs within this throughout the city to like kind of talk about kind of conflict resolution, like how to resolve your issues in a peaceful way, like not resort to violence. And, it was a very interesting experience because I think, there was a lot of growing pains with the program. So like I remember there were one place that would be like completely like the students were signed up. We had the curriculum ready, perfect to go. Another place I went to was like actually a juvenile detention center. So very, very different rules. And like, we had someone who's like one of the leaders of the study, who was from the community there. We were primarily there to help him. But then there's also one place where there was a huge mix up because the person supposed to lead, the person that we were talking to did not know about this person. And she thought like it was a punishment for the kids who are behaving badly, which is not. So I had to like actually first time I went there, or sorry, second time I went there, she like gave a huge lecture about how these kids are not behaved and like sent all 40 of them into for me to give a lecture like that. I was like, okay, this is not how it's supposed to happen. But I think it was a really good interesting way because I know like by next year when I did it, like things are worked out. They had the students signed up already. Like a lot of the stuff we were trying to figure out was different. And I think that was like my first time, like not my necessarily my first time, but first time in the US, really meeting like young people, trying to figure out how to talk to them about that. But also like me figuring out like what's my own kind of role? Like how do I handle this? Because like, I'm coming from a very different socioeconomic background than like a lot of these kids are. And there's like a couple of places where like these kids were smarter than us and they knew more than us. So it's like, wait, why are we here? So I think that's like what kind of like was my main interaction with the Center for Peacemaking and like kind of like inspired a lot of my career going forward.
So then you went to GW and got a master's in international affairs. Is that what took you? Because you already mentioned that some of the work of the center is localized because
Mhm.
Pat and others do work with the Near West Side and obviously the greater Milwaukee issues. But he also, as you also mentioned, do vast amounts of work internationally. Is that why you looked at, hey, I've got this sort of basic background now. If I go and get this master's program, then it opens up potential possibilities where I'm obviously came to fruition for you because you're working at the Carter Center. Was that sort of your mindset from a career path opportunity? You took your undergraduate learnings and said, I can build on that. And when I get the master's degree, that hopefully can take me to some of the organizations. I know you were at the Hudson Institute and some other
Mhm.
places. Was that sort of your career path?
Yeah. It's funny because, like, I knew, like, before I came to Marquette, I loved international affairs. And, like, if you talk to my family, if you talk to my friends in high school, talk to my friends in college, I would not shut up about it. And so for me, like, I knew, like, okay, I want to do more in this field. And, moving to DC was the dream because, like, that is, for better or for worse, that is a center for, like, international affairs. And I especially love the research angle because I'm the person who loves to read a history book, read a book on, like, the war in Syria or the struggle in Palestine or like economic politics in India. And I think for me, like GW was just the next step. And, I think it was interesting because, kind of going through these different experiences because DC as an environment is very radically different in a way that like it's both good, like it's a very intellectual hub, but then because you're dealing with the world of politics, like you see this other side because I think even though I knew I wanted to do research, I was like, maybe I can go into government because I did an internship with State Department once. Maybe I can go into think tanks because I love the idea of researching. And even like Carter Center, which happened years later, where we don't call ourselves a think tank. We like to say we're the do tank. So I think for me, it was like, GW was kind of me figuring out. 'Cause I knew I was like, I love research. I love trying, hopefully making a difference with my research. But I think sometimes being in DC is like, am I making a difference? Am I not? It's like that always the question, and kind of learning how the sausage is made behind the scenes. But yeah, it's kind of all worked out, and like I think like right now, I mean, right now I'm in Brussels, but I live in Atlanta. If you ask me 6 years ago, am I going to be living in Atlanta? I probably told you like no, I'll probably go like this place. But then I don't know the career takes you in a very strange place directions. A lot of my career, I think, has come in directions I don't necessarily see. It's like something I want. Like I know I want to do this, I know I want to do that, but how I get there is always like interesting what life throws at you.
Besides being passionate, we can tell from your answers, it sounds like you have a great curiosity. So that gives you these lanes open up. You go, maybe I'll do that. I'm going to do sort of a lightning round because of all the research you've done and ask you, just give us kind of some high level issues that you've seen in the various places that you researched. Let's first mention Syria. What are some of the, obviously there's some obvious issues with all these jurisdictions I'll mention, but I want to get your take. So Syria.
Well, how much time do you have? I guess if I'm keeping it high
No, I
level, I
get it.
think.
Certainly. Yeah, yeah. I
So,
mean,
but I think if you're keeping it high level, like I think there's a couple issues I would say is like working through this transition. Like how do like now that the Assad regime is gone, how do the new people govern? How do you even run a government? That's a very simple question, but that's a way more complex thing when you think about it. But now like you have all these different parties who were on different parts of the civil war. How do you make peace with that? Like how do you move forward as a society? And alongside that, how do you deal with the remnants of war? So like one of our big projects at the Carter Center is unexploded ordnance, but like that's just one simple element. Like a war doesn't stop just because like the fighting stops. You have the remnants of war that are still going to continue, whether it be tensions, whether it be like the actual physical remnants. So how do you do? I think that's like the two big issues of like how do you transition and govern, how do you make peace, and how do you deal with what's left over from the war?
given all the horrific things that have gone on in Gaza and the Palestine issues, again, besides all of that, what's your big takeaway? What are the things we should be looking for there? I mean, so many journalists have been killed, children have been killed, all those things that those horrific things that we're generally aware of. I'm sure we're not aware of everything, but what have you learned based on any research you've done in that?
Yeah. I will say like at least, and again, I will put again that disclaimer, my opinions of my own.
Of course,
Like
yeah.
but yeah, I think the big thing is like it sounds simple. It sounds like oh, like I'm kind of giving a simple answer or like I'm just kind of copying, but it's like the same thing with Syria. Like, what do you do with the war when it ends? Like, what do
Right.
you? Because now we see like one of the worst humanitarian issues. Like even something simple like looking at I bring up unexploded ordnance, but like we have a Gazan friend who pointed out like you know what you're going to need to do before that. What are you going to do about the rubble? And that's like a really simple question. It's like, wow, we don't actually know how to do with millions of tons of rubble.
Yeah.
And it's like, so how do you like not only like what do you do with the war ends, but how do you give hope where it seems like there is no peace? So I think that's like the big thing is like, you know, everybody thinks like maybe peace is like, well, this can't happen because look at this and that. But it's like, no, peace, it doesn't really matter what things happen. You have to learn how to make forward, how you move forward to find a peaceful resolution because you can either just keep fighting or that just means everybody will keep dying. So
Yeah, it's as we are recording this, obviously there's still the war in Iran going on, and at least those of us that are just paying attention to reports, it doesn't seem like there's any post-war strategy because, as you just mentioned, what do you do after the fighting has stopped? I think that's a key question in so many areas that you're obviously very familiar with. What about Ghana?
Ghana, I will say I haven't kept up with Ghana throughout like since I like went there with the Les Aspen Center, which was a really
Okay.
great experience. So like it was really interesting because my focus when I was there in Ghana was looking at like kind of like the things that bind us together in the sense of like this kind of you could say third world solidarity because even though I'm an American citizen born and raised, their interest in me was like, hey, you're Indian, like we Ghanaians and Indians are kind of rising up together in this world as like former colonized powers. And for me, like so I can't give you a good answer in Ghana, but I think for me it was like the idea I was thinking is like this is something that ties us together as like almost like well, the global south as members of the global south. So I think that was like the cool things. And I think even for a lot of places we could look at is like how what we can focus on the differences a lot or even focus on like, well, things are so bad. Because I think one thing to look at is like what ties us together, like what's like the common thing that we can share as humans and work out from that and build up from that.
More of a basic question. Obviously, in several areas of study, you've looked at conflict avoidance or, peacemaking as a goal. If you're talking to someone who is in an authoritarian position or in a position of authority, let me reframe that, and you disagree with that person and the downside of disagreement could result in violence of some sort. What are some things that you've learned in your career that maybe aren't in such a dramatic example, but maybe just day-to-day examples of avoiding conflict through conversation, through information? Talk a bit about what you've learned both at Marquette, GW, and just in the workplace. If you're talking to a student saying, here are just some high level themes you want to consider if you're trying to avoid conflict. I'm very interested in that because that's a day to day issue for everybody to begin with, and it can be much more dramatic, as we said. So, talk about that a bit and what you've learned over time.
I think the main thing that I learned is like, and the most important thing, which we all struggle with, I think everybody struggles with, and I will say I struggle with this too, is like just learning to listen
Mm.
because it's so much easier. Listen, I'm very, very guilty of this too. I'm not saying I'm perfect at this because I'm always trying, but I think like it doesn't matter what the issue is. You have to learn how to listen. Like what's driving their grievance, what's driving this thing. That doesn't mean you are condoning what they're doing or what they're saying. It doesn't mean that you have to accept it as fact, but you have to really listen. And you need to listen to them first before you can understand them, because only by like actually understanding the people that you're going to be able to do anything about it. So like it's the same thing like, when we deal with conflict resolution is like, they always will talk about like, hey, why are you talking to this person? They're bad or they're our enemies. But it's like, well, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And before that, you gotta learn how to like sit down and listen to them. And I think that's like one of the biggest things that like providing, I think like both from like what I've seen in my own career and what I learned a lot from my colleagues over the years is like, especially where like oftentimes we work as facilitators, occasionally we're doing it directly ourselves, but like the biggest thing it could do is just provide a space for people to talk and listen to each other. And that actually I'm not saying it's like this is going to solve the issue, you're going to end the war tomorrow by simply doing that, but like that's often an important first step because usually it's someone else, one person or someone else dictating the agenda and you need people going along with it. But it's like give them space to actually talk and understand each other. And that makes a huge difference. And I think that's something you can apply to your own normal life too.
Yeah, I think it becomes challenging, particularly in this environment, when you run into people that, not that they have a particular view that's different than yours, but that it doesn't seem to be based on facts or the information they're getting. They're in their own bubble. So it gets a question for all of us on a day to day level. Yes, I should talk to this person, but this person, the information they have, I don't have the opportunity to dissuade them from that. So I think that becomes, you tell me, that becomes a little more difficult in 2026 than maybe it was 20, 25 years ago, just because of the silos that we're in. And
Mhm.
listening makes sense, but then trying to respond to things that are not factual becomes hard because I would imagine, you tell me, because you're doing a lot of these types of research projects, they have to be open to listening to opposing points of view. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, no, it's a really difficult thing to navigate because I hate the alternative facts as I forgot which public figure bar said that, but like in a lot of countries you're dealing with that.
Kelly
Even
Conway said that. Yes.
Kelly
Yeah.
Conway. It feels like 100 years ago, but like I know
I
it
know.
wasn't even that long. But yeah, but not even that. Like it's interesting because even like I have a lot of family in India, and this is talking about the 2000s. There's a lot of not that they're coming from a bad place, but it's like they a lot of them believed in certain conspiracy theories where it's like okay. I think when I got older, like I understood where it's coming from a lot better. Like what's their kind of defense mechanisms that they have? Well, why do you think like this? And sometimes at least my one of the advantages I have is my role is strictly a researcher. So like one of the things I've been working on for so many years is less of like saying I need to like I'm not here to say what this narrative is right, this narrative is right. Like oftentimes like when I'm talking about the conflict in Syria, I'm just saying this is what happened. We know this group attacked this group and this led to this and this led to this. And it's like and I was like, and I'll put down like, hey, but this group believes this group attacked first, but it's like based on the evidence we see. So like we keep it very simple like that because it's like, okay, let's at least establish a baseline. And when you have someone like maybe like there's some people I know a lot that who maybe question, did we actually go to the moon? It's like, okay, I don't need to. I think one of the things like, do I actually need to say like, am I there to really correct them? It's like, no, we actually went to the moon. This is ha 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 because it's saying like, well, actually you're wrong. This and this and this. It's not a really helpful thing because all it does is like really activate a lot of their defense mechanisms. I'm like, wait, no, like I'm going to double down because of that. And more is often it's like, okay, why do you think that? Like, what's the me is like, and I'm not saying you need to do this for everybody in your life because sometimes, you got to figure out where your efforts being put, where your efforts best put. But it's like, why do you believe that? What's your skepticism? And I think for me, it's always more curious of like where it comes from because, especially where a lot of stuff, because I'm unfortunately on social media a lot. It's a really bad habit of mine where I can see like all these, and because of my interest, it goes into different silos of like different conspiracies or different like let's just say not so fun values, but because someone gets that content doesn't mean that's how they are as a person. Where it often comes from, like there's all these a lot of places overlap in ways people don't realize, and I think that's more interesting. Like realizing that and getting to the heart of that, but that actually kind of gives you more of like a better idea of like how to deal with it.
Yeah, it's an age-old issue, that's for sure, and the early days of social media seemed valuable. You could get information and news, and it's much more difficult to navigate that today. I'm gonna ask you a final question in a little bit, but before I do that, we will put in the notes, links to a number of articles that you've either written or co-written. One of the things that interested me, especially when we're talking about political violence, and as we're recording this is a couple of days after they stopped a shooting at the Washington Hilton at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That particular individual seems to be somebody on sort of the left side of politics, but we certainly have seen it on the other side as well, and it's awful no matter what the rationale. But you co-authored on some articles from a few years ago, some reports rather, and studies on the Kyle Rittenhouse situation. And I think folks can go and research what occurred then. But this young person shot a couple of protesters several years ago, and I would say is being lionized by certain parts of the political spectrum. But you and your colleagues wrote about that, but memes related to that. Just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll put the articles in the notes so people can follow up on more detail. But I was very interested in that angle.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that because especially I think I'm not. I'll put the thing that I'm not a militia expert. So my co-author was the militia expert, but it was actually kind of unrelated to when we initially started this project because we both like memes. I think if you spend enough time online, you like memes. But like between the Kyle Rittenhouse shootings and I think one of my big research topics has been the Hindu nationalist movement. Is like we're both here. Me and my co-authors were very curious of like how memes are kind of used as like a form of political communication. And of course, it's not like a new thing. There, there's been political cartoons. There's always like these kind of like aspects of political parties, like a Democratic Party culture, there's a Republican Party culture. But we were like trying to look at like how in this case, like Kyle Rittenhouse was unique because in a way there's memes around him and there's like memes like kind of glorifying the violence, especially among militia supporters. But like that more than that, he is like as we put it, I think my co-author put it very, very well. He is a living meme. So it's not simply that there's memes made about the incident he has, but that his very individual as a being is like being mimified by like different political entities, whether it be like militia supporters. And I think, one of the interesting things, I mean, both good and bad, right? Because it kind of gets back what you're pointing about these silos is like memes are really, really funny. They can often be a very good way of like giving someone like a brief glimpse at something like that. And among the people who are more advocating violence, if you're saying like, "Hey, this meme supports violence," they're just kind of go, "Hey, this is a meme." Like, have a sense of humor. It's like kind of like the wink to the supporters. But I think one thing with memes that we're seeing a lot is because it's being used as a way to solidify and overwhelm like public discourse. Because why like if you kind of see even on Twitter when it comes to the recent shootings, how I'm not saying it's like both sides equally because it's of course like a lot more complicated, but you can see like maybe supporters of the president all of a sudden adopt one line versus like
Right.
support people against the president, whereas like is this a false flag, false flag, false flag, and it becomes like this very repeatable thing. So rather than like as you pointed out earlier with the silos, I think it actually kind of reinforces silos a lot and like kind of helps encourage like the reproduction of like these narratives within your own individual silos. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Well, I'm fascinated by this stuff, but it is interesting how it's all developing for both. I think this you could do good with memes because I look to memes all the time for stress relief, but it's also bad where I wonder if like it trivializes a lot of issues and makes it
Right.
even harder to understand each other.
I think that's the most important point. It can and does sometimes trivializes what's happening out there. Ari, I'll get you out of here on this. Hopefully, students and others that are interested in the peace studies process and peacemaking in general, but maybe they're not going to go to class, but they want to learn something. How would you encourage them? What can people do who aren't engaged in policy? Maybe whatever their day-to-day job is, what can they do to further encourage peace, conflict avoidance, and as you said early on, just listening? What are some recommendations given what you've been able to do in your career?
It's something that, I'm trying to be better at now. Like I'm a full-time Atlanta resident where I have like my own place there. But I think honestly, just being in community with people, like finding those third spaces, like talking to your neighbors, and not like you don't even need to listen to them. It's like, hey, you have a health issue. Can I help you out with something? Can I help you take out your trash? Hey, do you need this help fixing the door? I think like that's something me and some of my friends here have been trying to do. Been trying to do better job with my neighbors, but I think that's something we've been doing a lot. And even if like that, just like kind of organizing yourselves because these are kind of scary times and like you never know what's going to happen. So like, what's if something happens to you? It doesn't have to be even like you because you guys are going to go to a protest, but like let's just say some bad stuff comes to your neighborhood or to your area of the city. Who can you rely on? Like who's going to be your like people? And I think there's a really good book I'm reading about Syria right now called Days of Love and Rage by Anand Gopal, which is about the people in Manbij during the uprising. And they're of course they're fighting against the Assad regime, but a lot of it has to do with like these people who had never been political before knew they needed to change things just because of how the country was going, how their own lives were going. And it's about their like attempts to discover like how do we do that? How do we get people involved who aren't political people? What's the things we need to think of? And I think one, just considering the fact that they're doing this in a wartime setting where they're being shot at, they're being bombed, and alongside that, they had to like navigate all these armed groups who are doing this, this, and this, and this, and that. I think it's also just for me was a very illustrated point of like, yeah, like, a lot of it came down to like, who is their friends? Like, what can they do for their friends? Like, why are they doing it? When things were going bad, who do they rely on? I think that's the first thing. And I know I'm kind of going on a little bit long, but there's a second thing for students is, when I talk about my time as a person on the data analysis team, the initial name of this data analysis team was called the Syria Conflict Mapping Project. It was actually made back in 2012 by a person who was not a staff member, but was simply an intern and grad student who was simply experimenting because he was looking at the line online. I was seeing like, hey, I'm seeing all these videos of soldiers defecting. Maybe I could put all these together. What does it tell me? And that's how he actually started mapping out networks of the Free Syrian Army. That's how we started our data collection. It sounds like really boring and it is tedious work collecting data, but the amount of things you can do with data, whether it be informing peace building efforts, informing policy, it is, and even like one of my things is just helping people who are humanitarians going like, hey, if you want to go into this region, this is the things you need to be watching out for. And that's like a really small thing that was created by an intern simply looking online, just wondering, can I do something like that? And I think as we get better, social media can be bad, but there's like our project on memes, like a lot of other scholars at the time thought that was a very weird thing to be doing this, but then we figured out how to do it. I think one thing is just being curious about that and like try experimenting with things. What it be like, how can I do this in Milwaukee? How can I do this in Minneapolis? Who can I rely on? And who can I run this by, see if it's useful? And you'd be surprised how much you can like be contributing to this without knowing it. Because again, this was just an intern figuring out, can I do this? I'll figure out what it's for later on. And now it's probably one of our biggest projects that we do to inform our peace building efforts.
That's great advice. And I think a lot of people can take that and run with it in whatever direction they decide. Hari Prasad, thank you so much for your time today. And more importantly, thank you for what you've been doing and what you continue to do. It's so important. So stay safe and thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.